Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. Apologies for the late start. My name is Brian Liddy and it's Friday the 2nd of May. We're joined in the studio today by William Duguid, the writer, activist for Perth and Kinross. Yes, Hub. Welcome, William. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you. It's great to be back. It's been a while.
Yes, it has been a while. So, first of all, it's our update in the Middle East, which uh, I don't actually have. I'm really sorry. I'm not seeing any text at all. Um, I'll move on to the Ukraine update as because we have that. So the Ukraine's Yeah, we'll carry on with the Ukraine update and hopefully we'll be able to come back to the Middle East update. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has hailed the long discussed minerals deal with the US as historic and suggested it had been much improved during those talks to now become an equal partnership. In his nightly address, he said, "The agreement has changed significantly during the preparation process. It is now truly an equal partnership, one that creates opportunities for substantial investment in Ukraine, as well as a significant modernisation of Ukraine's industries and, equally importantly, its legal practices." He said the deal was the result of a meaningful meeting with Donald Trump at the Vatican on the fringes of Pope Francis's funeral service, and that he looked forward to further results arising from that meeting. Ukrainian analysts have noted that Kyiv has apparently been able to extract some major concessions, despite Donald Trump's repeated claim that Ukraine has no cards to play. Ukraine held the line that the Kremlin was silent on Wednesday's agreement, but former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev claimed it meant Trump had broken the Kyiv regime because Ukraine would have to pay for US military aid with mineral resources. The deal will show the Russian leadership that there is no daylight between the Ukrainian people and the American people between our goals, US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent told Fox Business Network in an interview. His remarks appear to send a signal to Russia that Washington remains aligned with Kyiv, despite question marks over its commitment to its ally since Trump's return to power upended US diplomacy. The Trump administration will approve its first sale of military equipment to Ukraine since Trump took office, in an indication that the minerals deal signed by the two countries this week may open a path to renewed weapons shipments. The State Department has certified a proposed license to export $50 million or more of defence hardware and services to Ukraine, according to a communication sent to the US Committee on Foreign Relations. Trump paused all Ukraine-related military aid shortly after taking office. The State Department announced a 30-year veteran of the Foreign Service is to run the US Embassy in Kyiv during the critical moment as we move forward a peace agreement to stop the bloodshed. The appointment of Julie Davis, now the US Ambassador to Cyprus, was announced the day after the minerals deal was signed. She has previously served as Ambassador to Belarus and Deputy Ambassador to NATO. French Foreign Minister Joel Noel Barrot said on Thursday that the European Union was preparing a 17th round of sanctions against Russia, describing Vladimir Putin as the sole obstacle to peace in Ukraine. A Russian drone attack late on Thursday set buildings ablaze in Ukraine's southeastern city of Zaporizhia, injuring 14 people but causing no deaths, Regional Governor Ivan Fedorov said. Fedorov said Russian forces had made at least 10 strikes on the city, targeting private homes, high-rise apartment buildings, educational institutions and infrastructure sites. William, there's a lot in there about the agreement between Trump and uh, Zelensky about mineral rights. I wonder if, do you like me think that there's two things that I think of? One is that how is Trump going to get any companies, any mining companies, to go into what is essentially a live war zone to start digging up minerals? And isn't the other thing maybe that if I was Zelensky, I think I would just say yes to whatever Trump wants, and then when the war's over and they are able to go in and mine, then you just say, "I'm sorry, I was lying, you can't have it."
That's an interesting second. The second point is quite an interesting one. That hadn't really occurred to me. Um, this only works if the war comes to an end, and of course, a minerals deal is not the end to the war. What it is a slight surprise, bearing in mind some of the previous dialogue between Trump and Zelensky, particularly in the febrile atmosphere of the White House, where there was a certain amount of goading going on from the likes of J.D. Vance and some of the press corps who'd been put up to it. Um, that increasingly looks like just a weird situation. There's almost been, you would think, a change in Trump's thinking, and obviously that conversation that we all saw to the side of things at Pope Francis's funeral, that's clearly been important. I always have the impression with Trump that maybe he just goes along with the last thing he heard sometimes, because I'm not confident about his ability to process complex information. I can't really put it any more subtly than that. And therefore, yes, there has to be an end to the war in order for this to make any sense at all. And that's what comes next. The idea is that Trump will now go to Vladimir Putin and maybe try to get some sort of concessions out of Putin, which has not been part of the conversation thus far. The danger is that he'll just get fed a bunch of Putin lines and change his mind about things again. So we will have to wait and see on that. I think it would be exceptionally dangerous for Zelensky basically to give Trump the finger after peace is achieved. But I would question whether this deal will be as valuable for Ukraine and as much in Ukraine's interests as the Trump administration are saying, and indeed as some of the Ukrainians appear to be saying. The big issue right now is the question of whether the US is to be trusted as a partner, and that's far from clear. So we will just have to see what happens. I am hopeful, though, that if Trump doesn't get swayed by Vladimir's silver tongue, that we might see some progress on a reasonable peace deal where both sides maybe concede something, and most importantly, where there's some semblance of proper military support from the US so that there isn't an immediate reignition of the war when it suits Vladimir Putin. So on the whole, it's a good thing, but obviously there have to be reservations and a bit of caution.
Okay, thank you, William. So the plot thickens. We do now have the Middle East update. Excuse me, at least 52,418 Palestinians have been killed and 118,091 have been injured in Gaza since the 7th of October 2023, and that's according to the Gaza Health Authority. 9 Palestinians, including 2 children and 2 siblings, were killed and dozens injured, most critically in 2 separate Israeli airstrikes targeting a home and a community centre in the Gaza Strip on Friday. A ship carrying humanitarian aid and activists to Gaza has been bombed by drones and disabled while in international waters off Malta as it headed towards the Palestinian territory, its organisers have said. At 023 Maltese time, the Conscience, a Freedom Flotilla coalition ship, came under direct attack in international waters, the group said in a statement. Armed drones attacked the front of an unarmed civilian vessel twice, causing a fire and a substantial breach in the hull, it added, blaming Israel. Syria's new rulers have angrily denounced raids launched by Israel's Air Force against unidentified targets near the presidential palace in Damascus, warning of a dangerous escalation. Israeli officers have said that the attacks were intended to send a message to the Syrian government after days of bloody clashes near Damascus excuse me, between pro-government militia and fighters from the Druze minority sect. The United Nations Children Fund, UNICEF, warned on Friday that Gaza children face the growing risk of starvation, illness and death. For 2 months, children in the Gaza Strip have faced relentless bombardments while being deprived of essential goods, services and life-saving care. With each passing day of the air blockade, they face the growing risk of starvation, illness, and death. Nothing can justify this, UNICEF Executive Director Catherine Russell said in a press statement. William, is there anything there that you'd like to highlight?
Well, the huge story here is the 60 days of blockading of any form of aid, or indeed the passage of food into Gaza, which the world has either not noticed or chosen to turn a blind eye to. Because what we've got, as well as the bombardment now, is a total siege, the use of starvation, still the targeting of hospitals, and the absolute blockade of aid, including that boat that was bombed while in international waters, which is a disgrace. But in any event, all of these things are war crimes by any standard. And obviously, the world's judgment of war crimes is very often based on whether the war crimes are prosecuted is based on who the winners are. And clearly, at the moment, Israel is being there needs to be some accounting for this. This must not be allowed to become the new normal. And I wait with bated breath, or not, maybe I shouldn't hold my breath, for some form of intervention by the world community that brings this to a halt and at least lets aid into Gaza. We can't have what would effectively be another means of committing genocide by these means. It's been 60 days now, and history shows that this is unsustainable. It must come to an end.
Okay, thank you, William. So Reform UK have won the Runcorn and Helsby by-election on the 1st of May, regaining a 5th MP in the House of Commons after a narrow 6-vote win over Labour in North East England. The result followed a 17% swing from Labour to Reform UK and came amid significant local election gains for the party across England. Candidate Sarah Pochin secured 38.6% of the vote following a recount. Labour came a close second, while the Conservatives finished third, dropping to just 7% support. Reform UK, which had won 5 seats in the July 2024 general election before one MP lost the whip, now returns to holding 5 MPs in Westminster. The party also claimed mayoral victories in Greater Lincolnshire and Hull and East Yorkshire and gained control of Lancashire County Council. In total, Reform UK won almost 500 council seats, overtaking both Labour and the Conservatives in several areas. Labour's defeat in Runcorn has sparked criticism from within the party, with MPs warning that the government's early policy decisions, including cuts to disability benefits and winter fuel payments, have damaged trust. Some have called for a shift in direction to prevent further losses and to address the cost of living crisis more directly. Here in Scotland, the First Minister John Swinney highlighted the growing threat posed by the far right in UK politics. He said the result underscored the need to challenge extremist rhetoric rather than accommodate it, and emphasised that most people in Scotland reject the ideology promoted by Reform UK. Swinney reiterated the Scottish Government's focus on protecting public services, reducing inequality, and offering a distinct political choice. The Runcorn outcome adds to concerns over the direction of UK politics. Analysts suggest that unless mainstream parties respond more effectively to public discontent, movements like Reform UK could continue to grow. So, William, I don't know how deeply you've been able to follow the results of the council elections in England, but is it fair to say, do you think that it looks like voters in England are now turned off by the Tories after years of the likes of Boris Johnson, Michael Gove and Liz Truss and now Badenoch? But also voters in England are now disappointed in Labour, and so they've got no option but to look to Reform UK for a solution.
Well, that's how they will see it. And, it isn't just in England. I don't think Reform is as strong a force in Scotland, but it is not an insignificant force. Even in the 2024 election, it was getting a solid 2,500 to 3,500 votes in every seat. And when we go out on a street stall, as we have done a couple of times so far this year, we invariably get a couple of people who basically say to us, we are sick of all politicians, and therefore I'm going to vote Reform. Reform is where the vote goes, even if it's entirely against your interests. When you look at them, they're not a party of the people. They're full of millionaires and billionaires, and they have fairly heinous views. But they're not yet tainted by having been in office and failed to deliver. And maybe that's the difference. And I suspect there's a lot of that here. But this doesn't look like just a by-election issue. Often you get quixotic results in by-elections because the performance in the council elections is unprecedented for a party outside Labour and the Tories in England. The previous best of UKIP was 22%. The Lib Dems were nothing like this when they were getting large numbers of council seats. To have such a seismic result in one set of elections when only a third of the seats are up for grabs, and I think they've gained control now of 7 councils, Reform, is undoubtedly significant and suggests that they're here to stay. It's still a long way to the next UK election, of course. So there's a lot of water can come under the bridge. And maybe some of these new mayors or maybe some of these new councils will prove to be a damp squib in the eyes of the voters. But there's another strand behind this, which is that everything does seem to be shifting, with the possible exception of Canada, to the right in so many places. And a lot of attitudes, particularly when it comes to asylum seekers, etc., are exceptionally harsh, much harsher than I'm comfortable with. And it just seemed to be the way things are going. A lot of dog whistling going on and people responding to the dog whistles. And much of Reform's message is of that sort. There have been some very inflammatory things already said by Andrea Jenkins, the new mayor in Lincolnshire, about refugees and why put them in hotels? Aren't tents good enough for them because that's what they get in France? And this is not the sort of rhetoric with which I'm at all comfortable. And the question is, how do you deal with Reform? So far, the Tories and Labour have tried to move towards Reform's stance. Kemi Badenoch particularly has got very much more harsh in her rhetoric, but even Labour, they're effectively now just a right-wing party, but they look like a poor photocopy of Reform. That, I'm suggesting, is not the way to deal with Reform. The way to deal with Reform is to take their ideology on head on and to say, no, this is the way we do things. This is a more humane, a more worthwhile way of doing things, and this is why we do it, because it works better. But to do that, you have to be competent at what you're doing. And the one thing that the Labour government has not so far shown is competence. They've shown an inability to hold to any position, an inability to keep any promise, and it's hardly surprising that voters are losing patience with them. They lost patience with the Tories, of course, last year, and it hasn't got any better under Badenoch. So not the outcome I was hoping to see, but it's the outcome that I expected. And where do we go from here? Well, let's see how Labour and the Tories respond. And in Scotland, because we're not out of the woods, let's see how we get on in a month's time in Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse.
Thank you, William. It sounds like you're almost echoing the words of the First Minister after he heard the results in the English council elections. He said that Scotland must be alive to the threat of Nigel Farage. And the Scottish Greens, on hearing the results of Reform UK's success, they said it was a klaxon warning, underlining the dangers of Labour's complacency and underscores the urgency of Scottish independence. But a lot of the polls before the election said that there were going to be a lot of sort of close-run council results with no clear winner, and coalition was going to be the norm. So, and I think I'm right in saying that before the election, both the Conservative Party in England, Kemi Badenoch, and Reform UK both said that neither would touch the other with a barge pole. And I think Nigel Farage has said that these results are the beginning of the end of the Tory party. So it sounds like he's not getting ready to form any coalitions with any Tory councils. But how do you think that the cards will form? Can you see Labour forming any coalitions with Reform UK the way they do with the Tories here in Scotland, Scottish councils?
I don't know. I suspect not, and I wouldn't advise them to. I mean, you have to seek your support on a case-by-case basis. But I mean, for me, what's most interesting about this set of results is the number of councils that Reform actually won, where they have a majority of the seats. That's a surprise to me, because I think that's above even their expectations. So, how you deal with that is really quite something to be going on with. And in a sense, you have to let them do their thing and make a mess of it, and then they're under the same scrutiny. Now, Nigel Farage this morning said that he really looked forward to being put under the scrutiny. He said he would accept it with glee. I'm not so sure he'll be absolutely gleeful once things start going wrong. And of course, they are just as susceptible to problems as any political party. And there's no reason to suggest that they're intrinsically more efficient than the other politicians we've got. So, yeah, it's. I was glad to hear what John Swinney said, and I totally sympathise with John Swinney's view about trying to damp down the far right in Scotland. I don't think it's that much of a threat, not as much as in England. But as I say, the Hamilton, etc. by-election will be interesting. And Holyrood 2026 will also be interesting, because Reform are undoubtedly going to get some MSPs on the list, the way things stand. How many they get and what effect that has on the calculations in the list vote is another thing entirely.
That brings us neatly on to what I was going to ask you about next, William. The Holyrood elections in 2026, as you said, I think everything that I've read so far says that we can expect that Reform are going to have some seats in Holyrood, but obviously we don't know how many. I'm just wondering, what do you think, or who do you think Reform UK would take votes from in Holyrood? Are they going to just take votes from the unionist parties, the Conservatives and the Labour Party, or do you think they might take something from nationalist parties like the Greens and the SNP?
I think they'll definitely take votes from the Tories and from Labour. I think they will take some votes from independence supporting parties. Whether they take the votes of independent supporters, I'm less sure of, because the independence movement really has to work at countering what Reform are offering. We saw in the National this morning, as just popped up with a comment from Blue Sky, that the National this morning pointed out Nigel Farage's remarks about effectively dismantling the NHS as it stands and turning it into an insurance-based operation. Obviously, if that were to happen under a Reform government, let's say tomorrow, the Scottish NHS would not survive that, because the funding would disappear. So there is a lot of ground for fighting back now, and the pro-independence parties really have their work cut out in the next year to lay bare what Reform are and what they are capable of doing if they were to get any sort of power, either in the UK or a large amount of influence in the Scottish Parliament, and not pander to their racist and their other extreme views. In that, I got to say, the SNP particularly have done a lot better than the mainstream parties in England, and long may that continue. But they need ongoing support from ordinary independent supporters and the supporters of these parties.
Thank you, William. So it sounds like you're suggesting that Reform UK in Scotland would split the unionist vote, and so perhaps the SNP might benefit from that. I wonder if John Swinney would agree. It'd be good to be able to ask him, although obviously he's not going to relish Reform UK having any profile in Scotland. But so at the moment, Reform UK don't have a Scottish leader. Do you think that maybe if they were to get a leader in Scotland, and maybe if they were to drop the UK from their title, do you think that would maybe help them out in Scotland?
Well, it might if the pro-independence parties don't paint them for what they are. At the moment, it looks as if Nigel Farage wants to lead the Holyrood election campaign in Scotland. I think that would probably be a mistake. He is not a popular guy. But you're right about what I was saying about taking votes from Labour and the Tories, but bear in mind, it's very, very difficult to model the list vote when you've got an SNP who's got its vote sliced up because it actually did quite well in the constituencies. It maybe not as well as in previous years, but quite well. But also then a bunch of other parties, perhaps, let's say Labour and the Tories and the Lib Dems, all getting, I don't know, teens of votes, between 10 and 20, and Reform getting the same. Because Reform then, that's another slot that they will fill, and there are only 7 slots per area in the list vote. That's a danger, because what it means is to get a place on the list vote, pro-independence parties maybe have to be polling a wee bit higher than they needed to in 2021 and in 2021, 2016. So there's a lot of work to be done, and there's a lot of thinking to be done about how people place their second vote. I wouldn't dream to suggest to anybody how they might think about that, but they have to calculate in their minds what is the likeliest thing to do to get a large vote on the pro-independence side. It can't be split. It's likely that the unionist vote will be, but the independence vote really can't be split, certainly not by too much. And so there's some difficult thinking to be done. And frankly, it's nearly impossible to game, as we have discovered in the past. It's very difficult to predict because how the list vote goes entirely depends on how the initial constituency vote goes. And that just gives you too many variables to be able to really be accurate in your predictions. So some hard thinking to be done by all of us, I think.
Yeah, it's a good point to make that with a PR proportional representation system. It's a lot more complicated than first past the post. And I suppose what you're saying is the pro-independence parties shouldn't be complacent.
Absolutely not. And they should be prepared to form some sort of alliance. And I know that's anathema to them, but as a neutral on the party political side, I think we really do need some form of understanding about who stands in what seats, and then the movement supporting that candidate.
Okay, thank you, William. So the next item is Germany's domestic intelligence agency has formally classified the far-right Alternative für Deutschland party as a confirmed extremist threat, allowing for enhanced surveillance amid growing concerns for the country's democratic stability. The Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution, the BFV, announced the move following a detailed investigation into the AFD's ideology and activities. The agency concluded that the party's stance, including its anti-immigration policies and ethnically exclusive interpretation of national identity, posed a direct challenge to Germany's constitutional principles. The classification enables the state to monitor the party more closely, including intercepting communications and deploying undercover informants. Previously viewed as a suspected extremist entity, the AfD is now fully designated as a right-wing extremist group. It currently holds the position of Germany's largest opposition party, having won over 20% of the vote in February's snap general election. The party has made electoral gains in several eastern states and said it will challenge the decision in court. The BFV's findings, contained in a 1,100-page report submitted to the Interior Minister, cite the AfD's promotion of anti-Muslim sentiment, attacks on minority rights, and rhetoric aimed at undermining the democratic order. The agency also highlighted repeated attempts by the party to delegitimise protections for German citizens with immigrant backgrounds, especially those from Muslim-majority countries. The decision comes ahead of Friedrich Merz's swearing in as Germany's new Chancellor. His centre-right coalition government has committed to maintaining a strict separation from the AfD. However, internal divisions persist over whether to isolate or engage with the party in Parliament. With the support for the AfD rising and concerns mounting over the erosion of democratic norms, analysts warn the next legislative period will be critical in determining whether mainstream parties can stem the AfD's momentum ahead of the 2029 general election. So, William, I'd like to just start just by picking out one small item that point that passed quite early on there, which said that with the AfD party now being officially recognised as an extreme right-wing party, it means that the government can now increase the surveillance, including undercover surveillance. So does this mean now that in Germany we've got an extreme right-wing party which is threatening democracy, forcing the government, the democratic government, to use undemocratic means? Forgive me. Over to you.
Yes, thank you. The height of irony. The height of irony, isn't it? Yes. I can see where the German authorities are coming from in their evaluation of what AfD are. I do think, though, that anything that is a case of taking action against them on that basis, bearing in mind that they got 20% of the vote in the February elections, is a dangerous move because it could easily backfire. And I think that's one of the objections that members of the CDU are saying to Merz right now, that they're going to be portraying themselves as victims. And a lot of people will sympathise with that claim. And in fact, they'll get even more support. So it's a dangerous road to go down. But in a sense, you can understand, bearing in mind the history of Germany over the last 100 years, how even a party elected democratically, as initially the Nazis were, can quickly themselves destroy democracy, and they will be very, very cheery about that happening if the AfD ever were to get power. So that's what's motivating them, I think, to try and work against it. The problem is that it is essentially a strategy that could be counterproductive, and it might be more productive just to work out within. It's almost like the same problem as in the UK. What is your view on the main political issues, and how does it differ from the AfD? And absolutely ram that home and show them up for what they are so that they lose support. And also be effective in what you do for the electorate so that they can support you. That is the, if you like, creative and sensible way to do it. Trying anything else where they can portray themselves as victims is going to be potentially trouble. And I don't think we've heard the end of this. There will be a court challenge, but even if the court challenge by the AfD fails, there could be trouble ahead, I think.
Briefly, because we're out of time, but can you foresee a similar situation happening in the UK where the Labour government in Westminster has to bring in similar Against Reform UK and manages to do it in time before Farage becomes Prime Minister?
I don't think that hasn't really tended to happen here, and I don't think it would. Remember that the Germans do have a very difficult history that will be playing on their minds. It could happen here, but I don't think it's likely to. But what does need to change here is the attitude of the mainstream parties to the electorate and actually doing a decent job for them. And the same in Germany too.
Okay, thank you, Donald. Thank you, William. So Donald Trump has signed an executive order aiming to end federal funding for National Public Radio and the Public Broadcasting Service in the United States, one day before the World Press Freedom Day. Trump's order directs the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the CPB, which distributes federal funds to NPR and PBS, to halt financial support, citing concerns over alleged political bias. While the CPB's budget is already authorised by Congress through to 2027, the order has raised alarm about the future of public service broadcasting in the US, particularly in rural areas where funding supports critical local services. NPR and PBS serve tens of millions of Americans each month with news, cultural content, educational programming and public safety information. Through NPR, though NPR receives only around 1% of its funding directly from the federal government, smaller member stations rely more heavily on public funds, some receiving up to 10%. PBS has said federal support accounts for an average of 15% of its revenue, but that impact is greater for small and rural broadcasters. The move is part of a long-running Conservative effort to reduce or eliminate funding for public broadcasters. Previous Republican administrations have explored similar action, but this is the most direct attempt yet. The Heritage Foundation's Project 2025 has called for presidents to veto any spending bills that includes funding for public broadcasting. This decision follows a series of public attacks by Trump on the media, including repeated claims that public broadcasters spread misinformation. In March, the heads of NPR and PBS were called before a US House committee to defend their programming against allegations of political bias. The legal authority of the order is in question, as the CPB operates independently of the executive branch. Both NPR and PBS have indicated they are exploring legal and procedural options in response. The move has drawn widespread concern over its potential impact on independent journalism and media access in the United States. So, William, many years ago I spent a year in America, and I must admit, PBS was about the only TV that I ever watched, and it's the only thing that was watchable. And every now and again, the programming would stop, and an entire day on PBS channels would be devoted to fundraising, trying to get people to subscribe to public broadcasting services, a wee bit like us here in Broadcasting Scotland. This is an attack on the media in America. Trump's called the media the enemy of the people on occasion, and he's also called the PBS corrosive. So this is a no-brainer for Trump, isn't it? It's the last thing. Public broadcasting television is the last thing that Trump voters would watch, and it's also going to deprive voters who oppose Trump of a good source of news.
Yeah, potentially. Yeah. Of course, the answer to it would be if you're losing federal funding, but you can raise the funding elsewhere, and there has to be a backlash to Trump coming. I think there already is a backlash to Trump coming, but some of the better off, particularly members of that backlash, really need to put their hands in their pockets and make sure they continue to support these outlets throughout, so that there is another voice to be heard. It's again, it's another irony. This is an administration that talks about its own freedom of speech to say the things that they say as being so valuable, and yet their first move is to try to shut down the other side. In a sense, it's the same mistake as the Germans are making with the AfD, and that seem to be prevalent in politics right now. If you disagree with somebody, let's have the argument, and let's everybody say their piece, and let people make up their mind, educate people properly, and have a population that's capable of critical thinking. So I would imagine that this will come up for legal challenge, as so much is. I also imagine that the Trump administration will probably ignore the legal challenge. And what should happen with that, because it's a question of the president taking action that he's not really entitled to take, this should be for Congress to decide. But of course, Congress is still full of Republicans that seem to pretty much have swallowed the Trump Kool-Aid. But it's really for Congress to slap down the president here and say, no, you cannot do this. He'll ignore the judges, but he wouldn't necessarily be able to ignore Congress. But we're a long way from the American Congress actually standing up for what's effectively freedom of speech, which is the first article in the American Constitution. I never thought, even when we were looking at the possibility of Trump being elected, that the American Constitution would prove to be quite as, well, not weak, but capable of being surmounted by the onslaught of stuff that Trump and the administration have been doing. This is just the latest one. It should fail, and if people who oppose Trump get their act together and, if necessary, put their hands in their pockets to fund this outlet so that there is still a voice for the other side of things, then that's really what needs to happen here. I suspect that the tide is maybe beginning to turn with Trump, but maybe I'm reading too much of certain Substack blogs, and things will not turn out the way I think. But I do think that it's beginning to dawn on people, and particularly it will dawn on people once the effect of the tariffs kicks in with the economy, that maybe Trump is not all he's cracked up to be, even though they may have supported him and worn the MAGA hat in the past. If it weren't for the fact that the whole world would be catching a cold from this whole thing, including the economic fallout, it would be extremely interesting to watch. But until then, it just remains a worry for us all.
So the United States is set to increase fossil fuel production despite recent economic disruptions, with new projections showing a significant rise in emissions from oil and gas fields under planned and active projects. A new analysis reveals that greenhouse gas emissions linked to US fossil fuel development are climbing again, reversing a recent downward trend. The increase follows policy changes introduced during Donald Trump's return to office, including efforts to roll back environmental protections and expand drilling across land and sea. Despite short-term economic challenges such as trade tariffs and volatile oil prices, the US is still on track to reach a record daily oil output of 15 million barrels. Under Joe Biden, US oil and gas output remained high, but was tempered by policies aimed at curbing emissions. These included clean energy incentives and tighter regulation. In contrast, Trump's early actions have included over 140 moves to weaken environmental standards, to block new renewable energy projects, and promote further fossil fuel extraction. Analysts suggested that steps have reignited industry ambitions, raising projected emissions from future development. International agencies have warned that the scale of new fossil fuel projects threatens to derail efforts to limit global warming. The International Energy Agency maintains that no new major fossil fuel expansion can occur if the world is to meet agreed climate targets. Last year was the hottest on record globally, with extreme weather events continuing to increase in frequency and severity. Economic factors may still constrain growth in the US energy sector. Tariffs on key materials, uncertainty in trade policy, and falling energy firm share prices have all disrupted investment. At the same time, Trump's actions against renewable energy, such as halting approvals for new solar and wind projects, have raised costs and delayed clean energy developments. Analysts say the environmental consequences of rising fossil fuel could be avoided if governments prioritise cleaner, more sustainable energy alternatives. So, William, I was trying to understand when it says in the article that Trump's trade tariffs had made it difficult for oil producers in the States. And I've got this that from The Guardian claimed that tariff chaos had hampered Trump's pledge to drill, baby, drill, and described his first 100 days as a ruthless onslaught on the environment. They said it's been the worst start of any presidency for the stock market since the 70s. Many fossil fuel firms have seen their share prices slump. There's a threshold of $60 below which American crude oil is unprofitable, and it dropped below that. OPEC and the oil cartel recently increased oil production, urged on by Trump to do so, which further put down the pressure on the price of oil. The price of oil dropped again. That made the oil industry in America angry with Trump. One oil executive said the administration's chaos is a disaster for the commodity markets. Drill, baby, drill is nothing short of a myth and populist rallying. So does this mean, on the first hand, that Trump has no clue what he's doing, but also that if he is going to continue and get a third undemocratic presidency, that the planet is just going to burn?
The planet's in trouble no matter what happens now. I think we're probably past the point of no return. And I think Trump's a long way from getting a third presidency, but I suspect that may turn out to be irrelevant in any case. But it is, I think, true that Trump does not know what he's doing, because he's having to reverse things so often, and particularly the dialogue on the tariffs has been quite ridiculous. But then there's been the obvious effect on the stock market of uncertainty. Who on earth would invest in America right now? Because you just don't know what's coming next. Trump has been flip-flopping all over the place, usually, again, based on the last thing he's heard or something like that. So, yes, of course, maybe at one level Trump is saying, well, we want oil and gas to expand. But the oil companies are not going to invest while things are uncertain. And they're not going to lay pipelines when there are steel tariffs, for example. So Trump has unleashed chaos. It will take a long time for the chaos to rectify itself. And nobody knows what he's doing, but very much, I agree, he doesn't know what he's doing. But whatever it is he's doing, he needs to stop doing it quite soon, I think.
Thank you, William. So the next item is the First Minister John Swinney has reaffirmed the Scottish Government's commitment to tackling climate change, speaking in Glasgow as global progress on climate action faces increasing political and financial challenges. Addressing an audience at the Social Hub, the First Minister restated Scotland's legally binding target to become a net zero nature positive nation by 2045, a goal approved by the Scottish Parliament in 2019. He said the government remains focused on ending the country's contribution to climate change within a generation. Mr Swinney warned that opposition to climate action is growing, citing figures in the populist right who question the scientific basis for urgent environmental measures. He called on all political parties to stand against what he describes as climate denial and to maintain momentum in addressing the global climate emergency. The First Minister linked the rise in anti-climate rhetoric to the broader global context, where some countries are rolling back emission targets and multilateral funding is under pressure. He highlighted evidence of increasing extreme weather, referencing a rise in named storms in Scotland and recent UN data showing that extreme events displaced more than 800,000 people worldwide last year. While acknowledging that Scotland does not have a formal role in international climate negotiations, Mr Swinney said the Scottish Government continues to promote climate justice and support for vulnerable nations. This includes advocating for sustained climate finance and working with global partners to deliver action in areas most affected by the impacts of climate change. The Scottish Government's ongoing climate efforts include investment in renewable energy, nature restoration and sustainable infrastructure as part of its wider strategy to meet net zero commitments and support international goals. So, William, the item there spoke about the First Minister's comment about how right-wing commentators seem to be rolling back on climate change. I've got a couple here to give examples to give you. and see what you think. Richard Tice of Reform UK used a recent visit to Scotland to highlight his party's commitment to scrapping the net, what he called the net stupid zero. He also echoed Trump's words when he was here in Scotland, saying "Drill, Scotland, drill." This week, Tony Blair was criticised for intervening in the climate debate when he said that attempts to end the use of fossil fuels are doomed to fail. And I think Kemi Badenoch has also said that every country should just forget its net zero targets. So, considering the previous item, as in Trump in America and green gases, is the Scottish Government's aim to reach net zero 5 years before the UK government also doomed to fail?
Yeah, well, a bit of context. I mean, I'm not a Tony Blair fan, but seeing him saying that things are doomed to fail is probably illustrated by the other things you spoke about, because the politicians who are increasingly in all areas of the world, and they are typically right-wing politicians, are able now to get away with science denial effectively, and people are going along with it. Plus, we've got two major war zones, which doesn't help the planet one little bit. So I don't want to be quite as dogmatic as Tony Blair on it, but I do think that Scotland's target of becoming net zero by 2045 may well be met if enough investment can go into what it needs to. You certainly can't do it in a constrained economy, but let's be optimistic about how things might go. My concern would be that whatever Scotland does by 2045, whether Scotland is technically net zero, doesn't matter a damn if nobody else is. And if the world has no prospect at that point of becoming net zero, because Trump has gone nuts with drill, baby, drill, and because the science denial is happening in other places. And when major UK politicians do not have the political will to really go for it and make the significant change, which requires significant investment to absolutely transform the way we do things. I suspect as a result of that, whatever the Scottish Government does, it's going to be trying to do much more on the mitigation side. Certainly mitigation of weather effects in Scotland, which I think will get pretty hairy. To an extent, insofar as they've got the resources, maybe partnering with other countries. But I think the world as a whole is going to be going into mitigation mode very soon, because it will be forced to, whatever its politicians say. And as I said earlier, I'm sorry to be the prophet of doom, but I do think we're past the point of no return.
Okay, yeah, I wonder how bad things have to get before people are going to actually sit up and change as well. But time's against us. So over £8 million from the Scottish Government's Just Transition Fund will support job creation and green skills development across the North East and Moray in the shift towards a net zero economy. The fund, aimed at helping communities and industries transition away from high carbon activities, has reopened for applications for the first time since 2022. The Scottish Government is encouraging businesses, organisations and local groups to apply for support for new low carbon and sustainability projects. Since its launch in 2022, the Just Transition Fund has invested £75 million in a range of initiatives across the North East. These include a digital innovation lab to help decarbonise the construction sector, a travelling skills hub delivering STEM engagement and upskilling, and targeted training programmes based on labour market demand for net zero roles. It has also funded the creation of an energy skills passport to support offshore oil and gas workers moving into offshore wind roles. The announcement was made during a ministerial visit to Sarins PSG, which is an offshore wind assembly company that received £150,000 through the fund. The funding supported upgrades to training infrastructure aimed at preparing the future workforce for roles in renewable energy. The new investment will target projects that focus specifically on job creation, skills development and sustainable economic growth in the region. The Scottish Government sees this as a central part of ensuring that no community is left behind in the energy transition. The Just Transition Fund forms part of a broader programme of investment that also includes the Energy Transition Fund and £125 million committed to the Aberdeen City Regional deal. These initiatives together aim to secure long-term economic resilience while supporting national climate goals. So, William, is this proof that the First Minister, John Swinney, and the Scottish Government is putting its money where its mouth is when they both say that they're going to challenge right-wing climate change deniers, as discussed in the previous item?
It can be seen as a case of putting your money where your mouth is, and it's valuable stuff to be doing, and it's not just this 8.5 million, but it's the 75 million that's been spent since 2022. What I would say is that it's not enough, because I don't think the Scottish Government, under the current funding settlement, has the ability to do the sort of things that would truly provide the kind of grand just transition that might wean us off oil and gas. And of course, energy not being devolved to us is not a great basis to be going either. So it's a case of them doing what they can and putting as much money where their mouth is as they can. But we are constrained in what we do. And until we actually throw off the yoke and become independent and then grab the opportunity to run things in a different way, we'll always be just ever so slightly playing catch up. I think, I applaud what the government's doing here, but that is the harsh reality. And the sooner the Scottish people waken up to that fact and actually start clamouring for independence, the better.
Thank you, William. The final item. More than 105,500 NHS appointments and procedures were delivered across Scotland in 2024, following a £30 million investment by the Scottish Government aimed at reducing the longest patient waits. The Scottish Government had initially pledged to support the delivery of 64,000 procedures, 40,000 diagnostic tests, 12,000 surgeries and 12,000 outpatient appointments by the end of March 2025. Latest figures show that target was exceeded well ahead of schedule. By March 2025, nearly 79,000 diagnostic procedures had been completed, alongside 10,700 surgeries and 15,800 outpatient appointments. Forgive me stumbling over those figures there. This additional activity was made possible through targeted funding focused on addressing the longest waiting times. Data released recently shows waiting lists have fallen across several specialities. In particular, diagnostic waiting times are now at their lowest since October 2021. Health boards across Scotland were allocated extra support to improve patient access to care, and the results have demonstrated a marked improvement in service delivery. The investment forms part of a broader Scottish Government plan to reduce waiting times and increase NHS capacity, particularly following pandemic-related delays. The Scottish Government has confirmed it will continue this approach, with plans already in place to deliver 150,000 additional appointments as part of ongoing efforts to tackle waiting list backlogs. A further update is expected when the First Minister sets out the programme for government next week, outlining how the Scottish Government intends to build on this progress in the year ahead. Between March 2024 and December 2024, there has been a 71% decrease in waits for scopes at NHS Ayrshire and Arran, a 52% decrease in imaging waits at NHS Fife, a 28% decrease in ophthalmology waits at NHS Lothian, a 23% decrease in urology waits at NHS Lanarkshire, a 10% decrease in orthopaedic waits at NHS Highlands. So, William, here at Broadcasting Scotland, I'm sure you know, we try to finish on a Friday night with a good news story. Do you think we've managed to pull that off with this one?
Yes. I think this is a good news story. The Scottish NHS has its faults, and etc., but it is actually the best of the four UK health services, and it had a major issue with COVID and what that did to its waiting times, and it's now on the road back. and it's ahead of schedule. That was a very impressive um, overshoot of the target, and it links in with my own experience of the NHS and so many of the people I speak to. When you actually have an interaction with the NHS, they are great at finding the efficiencies to make things happen faster and better. Because they have to, because they are limited in the funds available to them, they've become fairly innovative, and we've heard about that in other news broadcasts. Of course, the general population, until they link up with the NHS for some reason, don't get to hear this, because Reporting Scotland tonight will almost certainly be kicking off with a bad story of something that went wrong in an NHS board somewhere. So that's what we're up against, because you don't get to hear how the NHS is actually doing, and we should hear much more.
Thank you, William. Yes, and if you listen to things like PMQs in Westminster, then you hear the exact opposite being put forward by some parties. But that's it for this evening here at Scotland at 7. So thank you to you, William, our guest for this evening. Thank you for giving up the start of your weekend already.
Well, there's lots more to come. Off to AU will be Glasgow tomorrow.
Yes, okay, perhaps we might see you there. But before we go, I just want to remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, we thank you very much. We were £16,000 short of our funding requirements in 2024, which has left us short of the money we need to pay our bills. We face costs of about £4,000 a month, and we receive donations of about £2,500, for which we're extremely grateful. We have raised over £7,000 this year so far, but we still urgently need to raise at least £5,000 if we are going to pay our bills now. Our programmes will, always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please do consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, and please donate whatever you can afford. So thank you to you at home, and again thank you to our guest, William Duguid, and goodbye, and thank you for watching. Goodbye.